Welcome to another weekly episode of Between the Lines presented by the Betsy DeVos Foundation for Higher Learning, where every student has the equal opportunity and choice to achieve the academic goal they wish. Today, we're going to be discussing 3 different literary texts, and we're going to be discussing them. So, today I'm joined by 2 professors from Stony Brook University. I'm your host, Jeffrey Koh.
I am Dr. Tim.
And I am Dr. Lutzman.
And today we'll be discussing The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. So, gentlemen, obviously education is something very, very important. I myself spent 4 years as a Secretary of Education. You know, that was an important gig, and I learned a lot about the importance of literature, right? So, let's talk about these books and also talk about where we think literature and education itself is heading. So my first question I have for everyone is, how do these 3 books deal with the American dream, or the reality of the society we live in, or the society in which the author wrote about?
Well, the 3 books, if you didn't catch that, were The Things They Carried, The Great Gatsby, and The Jungle. I believe they were mentioned until this point, but these are the books that we're discussing today. And I feel that these 3 books both show that the American dream is still intact and that we can learn from our mistakes to improve the American dream.
Now, let me cut you off real quick. So you say the American dream is still intact. Are you implying that the American dream is the same as when it first began, or do you think it has changed over these years?
Well, it certainly has changed over time, as any big concept does change over time, but it still has the unifying idea that you can move up in social class, and that by working hard, by learning, getting an education, you can move up in society, you can improve yourself, be a better version of yourself. So this is like an idea that's been common through all American dreams, although our specific version of the American dream today isn't the same in the old version, where the old version was, gaining land, moving up social status that way. Today, land isn't as much important as a signifier of social status.
So let's relate these to the text. So how do you think The Great Gatsby describes the American dream in your own words?
Well, I feel that The Great Gatsby shows, shows the wealth aspect of the American dream, that you need to have some sort of social status to your name. And I think it showed that some people were willing to go to limits. We're willing to go to push the limits on what you can do to sort of gain the social status. That's what Jay Gatsby did in his in the novel. And that shows us one of the fatal flaws with the American dream, that there needs to be some kind of limitation. There needs to be some type of way of controlling. Like, you need to understand there's a limit on what you can do to achieve the American dream.
Excellent answer, Professor. And what about from The Things They Carried, or The Jungle, both of which also discuss the American dream? How do you think they relate?
Well, I feel that The Things They Carry show that even after such a tragic event, you can still achieve the American dream in a sense, because that's what the narrator did. He experiences the tragic events of Vietnam. It was one of the worst wars. It took such a psychological toll on all of those soldiers. Yet he still came out to write these inspirational short stories that give us great insight. And that, in a sense, is like teaching the next generation. And it's sort of, in a way, it's accomplishing the American dream of like informing people moving up, becoming more enlightened by reading these stories.
Well, actually, I'm going to have to disagree with you there, because honestly, from how I see it, Tim O'Brien is depicting this sort of delusion that you're actually living the dream. Because let's be honest, I doubt any of those truly volunteered, because they were drafted, yes?
If they were around 18 when the draft came, they would be 18.
Exactly.
They don't really have a say. Tim O'Brien actually tried to flee to Canada.
That's not a dream. You don't. The American dream isn't to run away from America, from its problem. So you can't just say going to war is what everybody wants to go for. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that he's showing us that you can live the American dream no matter what happens to you. So he was drafted. He did want to go to war. He tried to run away. But he did end up confronting his problems. He did end up surviving the war.
Julian, I'm just going to have to pull up some textual analysis from The Jungle. Okay, so The Jungle talks a lot about how capitalism and this rush towards material goods and profits pushes aside human rights and ethical decision making. And the way that The Jungle is written, it depicts a society where the American dream is a corrupted status that only those that already have a safety net or a higher socioeconomic class status can achieve. And it makes it, Upton Sinclair writes about how these immigrants and their hardworking values, no matter how hardworking they are, they can't progress up the socioeconomic ladder because the system works against them. Because they come here with such little to give and a lot to lose, it makes it seem like the American dream is something that's not attainable, or because of the fact that they are already poor, it makes it seem that you can't really go up. There is no real social mobility. You know, if that's, I don't know if that's hitting home, but The Jungle is a large criticism of the system of capitalism that we still have, and in my opinion, I still view that our society functions based off that need for profit and that need for material accumulation. You know, this explains a lot of other issues like climate change and structural inequality. You know, this mindset is still something that's present in the American dream. In American society, which ultimately shapes the reality of how we can function within society.
Well, I feel some of the things that you said certainly has merit. I kind of disagree. I feel that Upton Sinclair is not attacking the American dream. And if you read the novel, it doesn't really attack the American dream directly. He's attacking the sort of capitalist system that we live in, right? So in this system, it has been corrupted by such an unmoral level of greed that, like, the American dream has been taken over by it. But he's not attacking the American dream itself. I think he's saying that there are obstacles that we need to overcome, such as getting society
there
to
are
have
obstacles that we need to overcome, yes, but wouldn't you say that the idea has already been corrupted?
Well, just because it has been corrupted doesn't mean that it can't be fixed, right?
Well, let's look at The Great Gatsby. So The Great Gatsby functions as an analysis or a narrative on this mindset, this mentality, this that overtakes these young people coming back from war, right? They saw the horrors of war, they come back and they fall in love with this notion of wealth and power and having fun. And these kind of values, these are easily manipulated into creating an entire generation of disillusioned and empty people. Wouldn't you say that's easily able to be remanifested in our society, especially when we have rising horrors?
Well, as society progresses, we learn from our past mistakes, and that's the reason why The Great Gatsby, one of the reasons why it was written, so that we can learn from the story of Jay Gatsby and from the 1920s and 1930s. We can learn from this. After the Roaring '20s came the Great Depression, and we learned some of the causes behind the Great Depression, and we fixed these problems. So in a sense, we can do that using literature. We can look at The Great Gatsby as a way to help avoid the events such as the events that happened in The Great Gatsby happen again. We can use literature to learn from it. So that's what I feel that we can do. You know, even though it can happen again, we can use literature such as The Great Gatsby to learn from, and we can take these values that we learn from reading these novels and apply it to real life and help avoid the problems in the novels. That's why some of these books are written.
Okay, fair point, Professor. So I think it's time to move on to our next set of questions, and that's really where we think literature is heading in the next coming decades or generations. So, Professor Tim, would you like to start on how you think the future of literature will look like?
Well, I'm going to focus on the aspect of poetry, and I believe that there are probably going to be more, stand-up, more poetry slams where people can openly express their feelings and express what they have in their mind. Because this current era, we're all facing like political and, well, it's not political, but like social, like racial,
Tensions.
tensions.
So you're saying that poetry can be used as a form of resistance or knowledge production.
Well, more like
Similar to the beatniks of the 1950s.
exactly.
Interesting point, Professor. How about you, Professor Julian?
Well, I personally disagree. I feel that satire is the way of the future for literature.
And why do you say that?
And well, one easy example to look at is memes, right? Memes oftentimes criticize things, and that's where we find our humor from. And also, they're very satire is a very easy thing to access. It's sarcasm is such an important part of today's society. We love comedy, and satire is a sort of a form of comedy, and so it's very easy to access, especially through memes, which call upon pop culture, which makes it widespread, and it's spread on social media, which makes it very easy to access, and everyone loves comedy, right? So memes, as a form of satire, and other written forms of satire, political cartoons and other stuff such as novels, satirical novels, right? These will be the way of the future because we love to see criticism through a satirical lens or a comedic version of it, sort of.
That's a valid point. Okay, so I personally disagree with both of you, gentlemen. I believe that narratives or accounts of everyday life is what will be the dominant form of literature in our coming years, mostly because I feel like people nowadays need something that they can relate to. It's in our society now, everyone feels so small. We feel out of place. We feel that we can't access some of these, technological advances, or we don't have any political power individually, or, we don't really stand as a strong opposition to things that we don't appreciate. We feel that our voice is very limited in society. So I think that...
Just to cut you off, sorry to cut you off, but just to say, you're trying to say that we're disillusioned as a society right now.
Yeah, I think we're at a disconnect, even though, as you're saying that the digital age has ushered in a new, proliferation of internet-based social medias. I still feel like we are disconnected as a society, and therefore personal narratives are a way that we can interact with one another in an intellectual manner, that we can understand some of the deeper structural problems that exist in our country. Because I think that, more than fiction now, we need raw emotion, to help us understand things that we normally couldn't see, especially because we live in such a polarized a world. We need that basic human emotion to make us understand that, ethical decisions shouldn't be partisan. They should be a basic and fundamental, human experience. And there are just some things that, as a society, things are deemed too controversial to talk about, right? But we must confront the realities of the world we live in. Every minute, micro, and macro detail must be analyzed by ourselves to become a more intellectual society. Yes?
Well, maybe that's why we have to rely on poetry, because, it's the embodiment of feeling. It's the embodiment of your mind, It's like
poetry is abstract in the way that it functions in our modern society. It's not accessible to everyone. Some people can't comprehend poetry in a way that narratives structured to be things that we can understand through the voice of a person. Poetry can represent other things that, some people don't have a background in. Narratives they can be simple, they can be complicated, but I think because they're more focused around storytelling, not story painting, it is something that is more powerful and more effective.
Well, for some of those reasons, that might be why satire is the way of the future, because satire is also very easy to access through very simple forms.
Yes, but satire doesn't have the emotion that narratives provide. It's funny. Yeah, it's funny. It ridicules certain things, but it doesn't feel like an emotional appeal.
Well, I concur with that statement.
Yeah. Well, thanks for everyone for tuning in today. this has been another weekly episode of Between the Lines, once again presented by the Betsy DeVos Center for Higher Education. If you like what we're talking about or have any comments, please chip in at www.betweenthelines.gos.